Hello everyone and welcome back to the Premiership Quarter. Today I'm going to be doing my finals week 1 tips and predictions, going through each final and talking a little bit about how I think each game might pan out and who I think will win. Basically every single one of these games could go either way, which is awesome to see for a week 1 of finals, with Sydney playing GWS, Port Adelaide playing Geelong, Brisbane playing Carlton and Hawthorn playing the Western Bulldogs. Only one game is in Melbourne, which we very rarely see, and I think it sets us up for a really entertaining finals series. Before we get into the video, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like on the video and subscribing to my channel, I'd really appreciate it and would really help grow my channel. But with that being said, let's get straight into the video.
It came up behind him like a librarian. Jesus!
So as I mentioned, there are 4 fantastic games in week 1 of finals. I'm really excited for them. It's kind of nice that there's only one final in Melbourne, as I mentioned, because the AFL have sort of set it up this way. They obviously wanted to have lots of games interstate, away from Melbourne, which they did with the opening round, having them in up in Queensland and Sydney, and now they get reward for effort, having technically 0 Melbourne teams in the top 4 and only 3 finishing 6th, 7th and 8th, considering if you want Geelong outside of Melbourne. The first game is on Thursday night between Port Adelaide and Geelong. I think this is going to be a very interesting game. Port Adelaide are going to struggle a little bit with ball movement, as there's no Dan Houston and Kane Farrell, who unfortunately had a hamstring injury that has now ended his season. But I still think that there's a really good mix for Port Adelaide. There's been some questions around Zach Butters, but I believe he should still be fine. And I think that there's a lot of excitement in this list still. Obviously, their midfield is fantastic, and you've got someone like Corn Francis who could very easily break open a game at any moment. I still think there's a lot of excitement in their tools, which Georgiades, who has been fantastic in the second half of the season, can be a real problem for Geelong. And if Dixon is able to stay fit, if they play Ollie Lord or Radagalier in that secondary role, then it could cause some headaches for Geelong if they don't play Tom Stewart down back. But for Geelong, a lot of it does depend on the midfield, because if Port Adelaide do score heavily, which against Geelong you can do, then they're going to really struggle. However, the big matchup in this game is easily going to be, outside of the midfield at least, who takes Jeremy Cameron. Do they go Zerk Thatcher and just let him go around the ground with him? They go Alira Lee to see if they can match it in the air? Or do they go someone like Lockie Jones, who, as I mentioned, can go around the ground with Cameron, given how fantastic he is, and then potentially also be able to lock down inside 50, as Cameron's not really a huge contested mark type of forward. For Geelong, outside of the Cameron matchup, do they bring in Tom Hawkins? I wouldn't risk it, because you've got that double chance. Use it like they did in 2019, I believe. But it'll be interesting to see how they do want to match up in the midfield, because who goes to Butters? Who goes to Rosie? Who goes to Horn Francis? We've also got Wines and Willem Drew for them to contend with. And if someone like Reece Stanley doesn't have a fantastic game, because Jordan Sweet has been very good for Port Adelaide since about round 17, then I don't think their midfield can hold it, and that gives Port Adelaide a very big advantage. And with the home deck for Port Adelaide, I have them winning. Now I don't get to do margins on this site anymore, because it is finals time. However, I think that it will be about 22 points, because I just think that Port Adelaide will be more damaging. They've got the home crowd backing them, aside from them backing Ken Hinkley, and they only finished above them because they were able to win in the final round when they didn't necessarily need to. And so I think Port Adelaide are ready, and it should be a good final, but I think this one might be one of the lesser, not quality-wise, but one of the lesser interesting games, even though Chris Scott could do anything to get Geelong the win. The next game is the Friday night game, which for Hawthorn is their first since round 15, 2022. I believe I saw that earlier in the week, and that's honestly pretty crazy. Now, I don't know who to tip in this one, because these two teams are arguably the most in form in the entire competition. Hawthorn have been fantastic. They started 0-5, but have been 14-4 since. They are just riding a huge wave of momentum right now, and it's working for them. They've become a very good offensive team, and whilst they aren't fantastic defensively and they can get scored upon, their midfield is fantastic, and they don't allow enough inside 50s because they defend the ground very, very well. Now, for the Bulldogs, can they get that ball movement game going against the Hawks? Maybe not, but I think they can get enough inside 50s, because if you look at the two midfields, their Bulldogs are probably slightly ahead in terms of development. You look at Trelaw, who's just made his first All-Australian team, so congratulations to him. You've still got Liberatore, you've got Ed Richards now running through there. I think it's probably a couple years before in front of the Hawks midfield, if you consider Newcomb, like their Liberatore, Will Day, similar ilk in terms of size to Bont. You've got Connor Nash sort of playing that Ed Richards role. And then you've got some of the youngsters as well, someone like Cam McKenzie, who looks pretty similar to Adam Trelaw. Nowhere near the type of player, but looks relatively similar. I think that the game will be won or lost by how much the Bulldogs can take off the possession of the Hawks midfielders, because that's what the Bulldogs like to do. They like to get their hands in and not necessarily win the first ball, but get it outside after then winning it off the opposition midfield. And from that, they do get a lot of inside 50s, and this Bulldogs forward line could very well affect the Hawks backline, as we have seen them now want to recruit Josh Battle and Tom Barrass. They obviously still don't believe that they could be premiership key defenders. And so now that the Bulldogs have Darcy, Ugle-Hagan and Norton, it could be a really difficult task. I still think the experience of the Bulldogs will help them, and I think that with the Hawks not having true key forwards, it might be a bit of a struggle for them to mark the ball down the line if it's not a wet day, and their smalls might not be able to necessarily get in the game, because Lobb's been very good. Jones is still a very good interceptor, and either Karmas or O'Donnell can play that third role very, very well. So my winner would be the Bulldogs, and that's sort of why I have them just ahead of the Hawks, but I see the Hawks having a lot of similar futures to what the Bulldogs players already have. But it's all going to be a fantastic year for Hawthorn. I genuinely struggled so much to pick this final, because it could go either way, and I think a lot of people think the same thing. That leads us to the Saturday games, where somehow Sydney versus GWS is not on a blockbuster time slot. You got first versus fourth, and that doesn't get a Saturday, Friday or Thursday night. That amazes me, but moving on to the actual game, I think this will probably be the best out of all of them. I think these teams are so evenly matched, and I think they are very, very close in how good they are. Sydney, obviously the best team during the home and away season. I don't think anyone can really doubt that, even though they did falter slightly. I still have them as my premiership favourites, but does that mean I have them winning? We will see in a minute. Sydney, their ball movement had sort of got them back to much better, back to their first half. Good, really great play, and in more recent weeks, as I was trying to say. And I think that they look to be much better. They're probably going to get Tom Papley back. They should get McCartan back. They should get McInerney back, and Heaney would also return as well. That's 4 ins that are really, really key players. If you look at how difficult they are to defend, it's because they've just got so many weapons. Outside of just the midfield threats of Heaney, Warner, Goulden, Rowbottom, and then you can throw in Adams and Parker as more your grunt players. You've got Blakey, you've got Lloyd, you've got Florent. There's so many players, and then you include Papley as well when he comes back. They have just so many weapons that it's so hard to defend. I think Papley is really, really important to this team, and that's probably a big reason as to why they had sort of started to underperform. And I don't think a lot of people would have really seen how much of an impact he has, because he allowed the others to play so much forward. They do like to leak out of stoppages and go more front, like to get out the front of stoppages. But Papley was able to protect it in a sense, because he would roll up and he'd almost play as an extra midfielder to where they can play as a half forward in a sense. and he was so important, and I think him coming back will be really important to Sydney. But for GWS, their midfield had started to get in some really good form. Lockie Whitfield off of half-back has been fantastic, but their forward line, outside of Jesse Hogan, I still don't trust. Aaron Cadman's still very young. Toby Green has been much better in the second half of the year, and he loves to play Sydney, so that'll certainly help. However, I just don't know if I can trust any of the other key forwards, and Bedford has been a bit inconsistent and played more of a tagging role at times. Daniels has been fantastic this year, but they both got rested against the Bulldogs, and having 2 weeks off basically isn't fantastic. It's also technically close to 3 weeks off before their game, and I think that could affect them. And I just think that with GWS needing to rely on their smalls and Sydney having so much dominance in the midfield when they're at their best, and I think they'll be there with Papley back, I think Sydney needed the rest more than GWS. If GWS could roll into finals, they would probably beat Sydney. It's their home ground, and Sydney have still been the best team all year. And I do have Sydney winning. I think this will be one of the best games, probably the best game, and I think it'll be a close, about 7 to 8 point margin. I think it'll be really, really good, and it should be one of the best Battle of the Bridges we've ever seen. But I just think that Sydney's class in the midfield should potentially get over the line in the end. And that leaves us with the Saturday night game of Brisbane versus Carlton. Now, I don't think I'll be able to watch this game, as I think pretty sure I've got work, but the big talking point obviously about this is going to be how many ins do Carlton get, because there's a chance that there's 8, at least from what I've seen. They've got a crazy injury list that a lot could come back. You've got Doherty, who's been rumoured, who could be a huge in. De Koning's been one. You've got the 2 key forwards in Kerno and Mackay. Jack Martin could be in. McGovern's another who was laid out on the weekend. Who else could be in? There's a couple of others that I'm forgetting. I think Zach Williams might be one of them. There's a lot that could come in for Carlton, and that could change. I just don't know if they should do all of it. I think De Koning should be one to come in. The key forwards obviously should be fully healthy. I wouldn't put Jack Martin in. I probably would put McGovern in because he was only laid out and he's got a extra week rest. But outside of that, don't make too many changes. I think that having the added importance and added responsibility with some of these players that have really stepped up, you don't want to shake that heading into finals. And if they bring too many players in, it might do that, and it could affect them negatively. But obviously, Paddy Cripps is in amazing form. Sam Walsh had a good game against St Kilda, so maybe he can build off the back of that. Akers was also pretty good. Some of their finals performances from last year now getting into form, which could really help them. But they're playing Brisbane, the team that they lost to last year. And the only query I really have with Brisbane is, can their front half capitalise on the dominance of the rest of the team? Because they have shown that they can be selfish, that they can be inaccurate, and that they don't always take their chances. They obviously have lost a couple games in recent weeks where they were unable to finish off their chances, being the GWS and Collingwood games. And it's just if their key forwards can kick accurately, because Danaher's guilty of it, Hipwood's guilty of it, Rayner's guilty of it, Logan Morris probably not as much, and he's a younger player, but still, can they capitalise off of Neil's dominance? Dunkley, McInerney's had a very good year, and obviously Andrews at the back. There's just a lot of talent in key places for Brisbane that I think are in better ilk right now. They're able to play in a better system, I think, as well, because their system's there, and I don't think you can say that with Carlton. I don't think their system's in fine form. For Brisbane, their system is in good form. However, their key forwards are just not being as damaging as they can be. And it all depends on that. I think Brisbane get a 3-goal head start against Carlton, given they're at home. It's just whether that's a 3-goal head start or a 3-point head start with the accuracy that they bring. Now, if Carlton can bring everyone back and they're all fully fit and firing, then I actually have them winning. But I don't think they'll be able to bring everyone back, and I don't think they'll all be fit and firing. And so I still have Brisbane winning, but a lot of it depends on if they're accurate. I back them in for at least the elimination final at home, but we'll have to see next week if they were to win, how they would do again against what I would have as GWS. I would have Brisbane winning by just about 2 goals, as I think Carlton might be the ones who are inaccurate. There's a lot of pieces around Carlton that I just still don't trust. How much do they want to balance youth versus bringing in the experienced players is obviously the big question, but I still have Brisbane winning. So that's going to set up 2 semi-finals between GWS and Brisbane, which should be a really interesting matchup, given we saw this only 3 weeks ago. And then Bulldogs versus Geelong, which I believe the Bulldogs smacked Geelong earlier in the year, which was like Lob's second game moving back. And that should also be very interesting, as that was at GMHBA, and maybe this one is too. I think it'll be very interesting who then would go through, because you'd have either Bulldogs or Geelong playing Sydney, and either Brisbane or GWS playing Port in Adelaide. And I think that could set up either of these same seasons. But that is the end of this video. I really appreciate you guys sticking around. If you wouldn't mind leaving a like on the video if you did enjoy it, as well as hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button if you do enjoy this type of content. And there's going to be a lot more on its way, as it's the end of the season and we're coming through trade and free agency and the draft. But as always, appreciate you guys sticking around, and I will see you all next time.